Donk, donk, donk. Most players have heard donking is for the fish. Some guy at the table called it a donk bet one day, something donkeys do, donkeys being the worst players in the universe, and the name stuck. And now an entire generation of poker players thinks leading into the pre-flop raiser is something only donkeys do. I'm here to tell you that's exactly backwards. A well-constructed donk bet is one of the most powerful weapons in live poker, and almost nobody at your table knows how to use it or respond to it. In this video, I'm going to show you exactly why that's the case and how you can exploit it every single session. This is Vinton Poker, precision in, profits out. I'm Vinton, and I've spent 23 years playing this game and over 4 years of coaching players just like you from all corners of the world. And if there is one pattern I see over and over again, it's this. Good players leaving money on the table simply because they're scared of a label they don't even understand. They're scared of looking like a fish, because after all, only the fish dunk, right? Well, I'm here to tell you more often than not, that's completely wrong. But first, let's talk about what a donk bet actually is, why it got its name, and why the math behind it is completely different from the reputation it carries. A donk bet is simply when the out of the position player leads into the player who had the betting lead in the previous street. For example, on the gun raises, you call from the big blind, the flop comes 9-7-4 rainbow, and instead of simply checking to the raiser the way the textbooks say you should do, you fire 40 into a $60 pot. That's a donk bet. Years ago, weak recreational players led into the pre-flop raiser with any pair because they were scared the raiser might check back behind and they would miss their one chance to get value. Those bets were sloppy. They had no plan behind them. And over time, the name stuck to the play instead of the bad execution. But here's the thing that solvers have shown us about donk bets. Donk betting is part of an optimal strategy on a huge number of board textures. The problem was never the action. The problem was that nobody using it had an articulable reason for doing it. They simply didn't understand it, so they couldn't execute it. And that's what we're going to fix right here, right now, so pay close attention. The first reason donk betting works is that it temporarily reclaims the betting initiative from the raiser on the previous street to the donker. Now, I want to be very clear here because this is critical to understand. When someone donks into the raiser, most commonly the pre-flop raiser, the pre-flop raiser doesn't lose control of the hand. They still have position. They can still raise you. They can still float and apply pressure later. What changes is the decision tree. Normally, they get to decide whether the pot grows, whether to check back for a free card, what sizing to use if they bet. But the second you lead into them, you force them into a reactive role on that street. They're answering your question instead of asking their own. That shift doesn't last the whole hand, but while it's active, it matters more than most players ever realize. Try to imagine this hand. The button raises and you defend from the big blind, and the flop comes 8-7-5 with 2 diamonds. You're holding 9-6 of diamonds, a monster combo draw. If you check here, the button can check back with hands like ace queen, king jack, ace 10, pocket pairs, all sorts of overcards, and now everybody at the table gets to see a free turn card. But if you lead for 50 to 75% pot, you remove his option to check back entirely. Instead of deciding whether to bet or check, he's now forced to decide whether to fold, call, or raise. You've completely changed the decision tree. Many naked overcard hands are now in an uncomfortable position. A lot of weaker draws end up paying you off too, depending on the player, of course. And now you're building a pot in a spot where you're very likely ahead of the range that would have checked behind. The second reason donk betting works is that it lets you attack capped ranges. This is probably the biggest edge strong players get from this play. Say the button 3 bets pre-flop and you call. On the flop, the action goes check, check, meaning the villain checks back the flop on a king 8-5 board with a flush draw. The turn comes 7. If they check that flop, their range is likely capped. They rarely have pocket aces, pocket kings, pocket queens, pocket jacks, ace king, or king queen in that spot, because those hands usually bet that flop. When the turn improves your entire range more than theirs, that's your moment. You donk. You're attacking a range that's already surrendered the initiative, and most live players have no idea how to defend against that. There's another powerful use for small donk bets that hardly anyone talks about. In deep stack pots, especially in 3-bet pots, on low connected boards, a small lead can be an incredibly effective way to reclaim the initiative. Instead of automatically handing control back to the pre-flop aggressor, you force them to react to your decisions first. On boards where your range retains more of the strong hands, that small lead immediately puts pressure on parts of your opponent's range that missed the flop while still allowing you to build the pot with your value hands and strongest draws. At the same time, the response begins to reveal the strength of their range, giving you valuable information before the pot grows even bigger. The deeper the stacks, the more valuable that initiative becomes, because every betting decision shapes the EV of the streets that follow. Now, let's get into something that most coaches never talk about, and this is going to change how you see every flop you play out of the blinds. Before we go on, if you're getting value from this video, give it a like and share it with someone else who's also serious about becoming a crusher just like you. Your support helps this channel grow, and it means the world to me. Also, don't forget to share your thoughts and questions in the comments below as I read them all. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any future episodes. And feel free to send me a super thanks in proportion to the value you feel you're getting from these videos. I really appreciate it. Now, back to the thing that's going to change how you see every flop you play out of the blinds. The first thing we need to understand is the difference between range advantage and nut advantage. Range advantage just means who has more overall equity across their entire range. Nut advantage means something entirely different. It means who owns more of the strongest possible hands on that specific board. I will do specific videos in the future on both of these two topics because they're not just critical to understand, but are also a bit more nuanced in different contexts. But for now, let this brief introduction and definition suffice. In general, the player with the range advantage has more profitable betting opportunities because their range performs well across the board. But when the out of the position player holds a significant nut advantage, that's where leading starts to make a lot more sense. You're no longer just reacting to the pre-flop raiser because you have enough of the strong hands that you can credibly represent them and force your opponent to respond. Here's why that distinction matters so much. Button opens, big blind calls, and the flop comes 6, 7, 4 rainbow. Even if the overall equity between the two ranges is relatively close, the big blind has a much higher density of nutted hands, more combination of straights, two pairs, and sets. The button still has plenty of strong overpairs, but the big blind connects much harder with the very top of this board. So even when the overall equity is close, the big blind has the nut advantage. And that nut advantage is exactly where a lot of your most profitable dunks come from. You don't need to be ahead on average across both ranges. You don't always need the higher average equity. In many spots, having a greater share of the strongest hands is enough to justify leading. Now, let's talk about something I consider one of the biggest hidden sources of EV in this entire game. And it's something almost nobody puts a name to. I call it equity taxation. A donk bet isn't only a value bet, a bluff, or a semi-bluff. It's also a toll booth. When you check, every hand in your opponent's range gets to realize their equity for free. Ace King gets to realize its equity. Queen Jack gets to see a turn for nothing. A backdoor flush draw gets a card it never paid for. A pocket pair gets another chance to improve without putting in a dime. The reason equilibrium strategies include donk bets on certain boards is because checking 100% would allow the in-position player to realize too much equity too easily. The moment you lead, all of that changes. Now, ace king has to pay to keep drawing. Queen jack has to pay to continue. That pocket pair has to decide whether it's worth continuing given the price you've just attached to peeling another card. You're not always trying to win the pot right there. Sometimes the goal isn't to win the pot immediately. The goal is to make every hand that wants to continue pay the correct price for its equity. And a lot of live players never even notice that they're paying that hidden tax. Now, here's where equity taxation and cap ranges come together. That turn donk on a king 8-5 board isn't really attacking your opponent's opening range from preflop. It's attacking the range that he chose to check back on that flop. By checking, he told you something. His range is now weighted towards medium strength hands, draws, and hands that wanted to realize their equity cheaply. When the turn improves your range more than his flop checking range, that's your opportunity to lead. You're attacking a weaker, more capped range while simultaneously forcing all of those medium strength hands and draws to pay if they want to continue. That's where the EV comes from. So here's a question I want you to start asking that most players never even think about. The first question is obvious. Does this board favor my range? You absolutely need to answer that one first, because the board determines where your strategic edge comes from. That's poker theory. Once you understand it, you ask yourself a more profitable question. Does my opponent know this board favors my range? Those two are completely different questions. Against a player who understands range interaction, your decision needs to respect the board, the ranges, and how often each player arrives at the flop with strong hands. But against a retired engineer who's never studied poker theory and plays his own two cards every hand, the calculation changes. He's usually not making decisions based on range advantage or not advantage. He's making decisions based on confidence. If your lead doesn't fit the betting pattern he expected, and your sizing tells a believable story, uncertainty starts creeping into his decision making. And uncertainty is one of the biggest sources of EV in live poker. The board tells you where your strategic advantage comes from. Your opponent tells you how much of that advantage you actually can capture. That's the difference between understanding poker theory and knowing how to exploit the people sitting across from you at the table. Solver logic tells you where your strategic advantage comes from. Live players tell you how to maximize it. The better you become at combining those two ideas, the more profitable your donk bets become. Live poker isn't played against solvers. It's played against human beings. The players who consistently win are the ones who understand the theory, and then they exploit the mistakes people actually make. Now let's talk about sizing, because this is where most live players completely fall apart. It isn't that they bet too small or too big. It's that their sizing has no strategic purpose. Sometimes they fire a tiny lead simply because they're afraid of giving a free card. Other times they bomb the pot because they think bigger automatically means stronger. Both mistakes come from the same problem. They're choosing a size before they've decided what they actually want the bet to accomplish. Instead, before you ever reach for your chips, ask yourself one question. What is this bet trying to accomplish? Is it extracting value, denying equity, charging your opponent to realize their equity, building a pot with hands that benefit from playing for stacks, attacking a cap range? Once you know the objective, choosing the right sizing becomes much easier. As a general exploitative guideline, not as a universal rule, smaller bets, around 25 to 30% of the pot, They work well when your objective is to deny equity, tax your opponent's equity realization, or apply pressure across a wide portion of your range. Larger bets, somewhere around 50 to 75% or even more, tend to work better when you're building the pot with your strongest value hands, leveraging powerful draws, or putting maximum pressure on the weaker part of your opponent's range. Solvers will adjust these sizings depending on the board texture, stack depth, and range interaction, but for most live cash games, these two sizing bands are practical, effective starting points. Good hands to lead with include strong made hands like sets, two pairs, and straights, especially on wet boards where there is a lot of value to be gained and a lot of equity to protect. These hands are often flexible enough to profit from either checking or leading, depending on the board and the opponent. But on dynamic textures, leading frequently becomes more attractive because you can start to build the pot immediately while charging draws and weaker hands to continue. Interestingly, some of your most strongest draws have even more incentive to lead than your strongest made hands. A set can often profit from multiple lines because its value is more stable, but a monster draw gains enormously from betting by creating massive fold equity and building the pot for the times it improves, and forces weaker hands to play to realize their own equity. What you want to avoid is leading with a weak one pair hand simply because you're afraid of giving your opponent a free card. That's not strategy. That's fear making decisions for you. Before you reach for your chips, ask yourself what your bet is actually trying to accomplish. If you can't identify a clear strategic objective, checking is often the better play. So make this a habit. Whenever the pre-flop raiser checks back the flop, make a mental note. That check tells you something valuable about the range they chose not to bet. Then, if the turn card improves your range more than it improves their checking range, start looking for profitable opportunities to lead. Those are some of the best donk betting spots you'll find in live cash games. Now, if everything we've just covered, range advantage, not advantage, equity taxation, cap ranges, bet sizing, and knowing exactly when to lead instead of check, if all of that feels like a lot to process all at once, don't worry. That's exactly why I built the Delusion Killer Masterclass. It's designed to take those concepts one step at a time so you're not just memorizing plays, you're learning how to think. That's how you stop playing on feel and start making precise, profitable decisions. If that sounds like the player you want to become, check out the Delusion Killer Masterclass using the link in the description below, or go to vintonpoker.com/course. And if you'd like personalized feedback on your game, I offer a free 60-minute one-on-one coaching session. No sales pitch, no pressure, just you and me breaking down your actual hands, identifying your biggest leaks, and building a plan to help you become a stronger, more profitable live cash player. You can book your free session through my direct WhatsApp using the link below in the description. But I digress. The biggest mistake I see players make once they learn this concept is using it as a parlor trick. They think I'm going to donk because he'll never expect it. That's it. That's the whole plan. That's not a fucking reason, my friend. A surprise is a bonus. It's never the objective. Every single donk bet needs an actual job to do. Deny equity, extract value, build a bigger pot while you have the best of it, attack the cap range, exploit a board where you hold the nut advantage even if the raw equity is close. And here's something that surprises a lot of players. Some of your best donk bets don't come from the strongest made hands. They come from the hands that gain the most by betting instead of checking. Take this flop, for example. 9-8-6 with two spades. You're holding ace jack of spades. Right now, you only have ace high, but you also have a monster draw with tremendous equity. Now ask yourself this question. What does betting accomplish that checking doesn't? A lot. If you lead, you can win the pot immediately when the weaker part of your opponent's range can't continue. You force overcards and weaker draws to pay if they want to continue. You build a larger pot for the times you make your flush or your straight. And perhaps most importantly, you stop your opponent from realizing their equity for free. If you check instead, hands like ace king, queen jack, or small pocket pairs may simply take a free card. You've allowed them to realize their equity without paying for it. That's why powerful draws often become incredible donk betting candidates. It's not because they're stronger than your made hands. It's because they gain more from betting than they do from checking. A donk bet isn't just trying to win the pot right now. It's extracting value from your equity while you're forcing your opponent to pay for theirs. You're not hoping to hit your draw. You're making every hand that wants to continue earn the right to see another card. Donk betting isn't really about winning the flop. It's often about shaping the entire hand tree. When you donk the flop and the villain doesn't have a great answer, you've changed the geometry of the hand. Now you're in a position to barrel the turn. You're in a position to shove the river if the right card falls. Your flop donk wasn't just worth one street of value. It built the foundation for the streets that comes after it. Live poker rewards players who understand initiative, not just position. I would rather have the initiative out of position against many typical live players than have position with no initiative at all, because the initiative lets you tell the story first, but the story only works when it's actually supported by the board, by the range interaction, by the action that came before it, and by the sizing that makes sense. The story only works because the strategy behind it is sound. So the next time you're sitting in the big blind and the flop comes out low, connected, and wet, don't automatically just check because that's what you have always done. Stop for a second and ask yourself, do I have a strategic reason to lead here? Does this board interact favorably with my range? Do I hold enough of the strongest hands on this board? Am I extracting value, denying equity, or forcing my opponent to pay to realize theirs? If the answer is yes, then you've probably found a profitable donk betting opportunity. Don't donk because it's unexpected. Donk because the math, the ranges, and your objective all say it's the highest EV play. That's precision in, profits out. And if you want to keep improving and keep leveling up your game, watch this next video. As always, I'm your friend Vinton. GG.